Hi everyone, welcome to DASA Connect 2023. My name is Tom Geraghty and I'm going to be talking about psychological safety in DevOps teams. And on the next slide, we can see a little bit about me. I'm the founder of a website called psychsafety.com. The company behind that is called Iterum. And my background, so my background is originally in science and research and biological research when I had a job title of experimentalist. Shortly after that, I got into technology and I became a sysadmin, moved into infrastructure and operations, and then started to scale up into managing software development teams, and then ended up in CIO and CTO roles for various firms, including hyperscaling startups and global financial businesses. Most recently, I had a role at Red Hat, the big Linux company, and now we're focusing on psychological safety, and our mission is to make the world of work a safer, more equitable, and higher performing place. But let's dive into psychological safety itself and its particular relevance to software engineering and DevOps. And with that in mind, this is the first ever computer bug, and it will become clear soon why we're looking at this. This is the first ever computer bug found around 1945 in the Harvard Mark II computer. And you can see some timestamps on the left there. The action was started at 8 a.m. and then a couple of hours later, this is not a fast computer. A couple of hours later, it was stopped because there was something going wrong. It wasn't, and it needed debugging. And you can see there a little bit later on in trying to find out what was going wrong, started running the multi-adder test, and someone found a moth in relay 70 on panel F, and actually made the note on wrote on the notes there, the first actual case of a bug being found. And this bug was found by a woman called Grace Hopper. You can see her on this next slide. And Grace Hopper was an amazing woman. She was born in 1906. She got a PhD in maths from Yale and became a professor at Vassar University. Over her career, she got 40 honorary degrees and became US Navy Rear Admiral. And it was Grace Hopper, in fact, that co-created COBOL. It was Grace Hopper that believed that computer code should be able to be read and written by humans as well as machines. And in relation to machines and people, she said this. She said, you manage things and you lead people. And I fundamentally agree with her. I fundamentally believe this to be true. And I also believe that a lot of the problems, a lot of the dysfunctions that we see in teams all over the world, including DevOps teams, are because we try to manage people in the same way that we manage things. And of course, we can't manage people in the same way we manage things. We are not things, we are human beings. And so we're going to be talking in this session about that human side of of management and leadership, the human factors. So let's have a look at the next slide and examine the human factors in this disaster. This is the Challenger disaster, 1986. There's a great Netflix documentary about this if you want to dive deeper into it. And so what we're looking at here is there was a problem. There was a known problem with the O-rings, the rubber O-rings separating the different segments of those solid rocket boosters, the SRBs that you can see on the side igniting there. There was a known problem that they became brittle at low temperatures. The engineers at the manufacturers and at NASA knew about this problem. They were aware of this problem. Now, normally this was not so much of a concern because in Florida and Cape Canaveral, it's usually pretty warm. But on the launch date, the intended launch date of Challenger in 1986, it was expected to be pretty cold. In fact, it was already pretty cold. It was so cold that there was frost forming on the outside of the space shuttle as it was sitting on the launch pad. And the concern was that these rubber O-rings, because they got brittle, would leak fuel during takeoff and cause an explosion. Now, the engineers in both NASA and the suppliers raised this concern to their managers. They raised this concern to their direct managers. And those managers had the job of escalating that concern back up to the people right at the top who had the authority to delay or change the launch date. But there was great commercial and political pressure to make that launch date. This was a very visible launch. And so there was great pressure that launch date should go ahead. And no one wants to give the boss bad news, right? You'd never want to give your boss bad news. Giving your boss bad news can be fearful, it can be quite anxiety-ridden, and it can result in some interpersonal consequences for you. So managers who had to escalate this concern to their managers watered down the concern. They diluted the concern. until by the time it got to the top, it wasn't that big a deal at all, if it got to the top at all. And so the launch went ahead as planned, and disaster occurred, and the shuttle blew up, killing all members of the crew on board. Now, of course, we might not be launching shuttles into space, but we're delivering projects, we're delivering software and functions and functionality and features. And in a lot of these reports, in a lot of these projects, we're creating reports that have red, amber, green status. For example, something might be at risk of not getting completed on time. And when that gets reported back, sometimes when you see this dynamic at play, when it's got to be reported up through the layers of an organization, a red gets converted to a green. A red gets converted to an amber gets converted to a green, as it so slowly filters and dilutes up until it's all green at the top, and a project that's all red at the bottom is green and happy days at the top. We call this the watermelon effect, or greenwashing, the watermelon effect, because it's all red in the middle and green on the outside. So whilst we can see, we might not be launching space shuttles, but we can see the same dynamic at play in our workplace. And we call an element of this dynamic psychological safety. So if we look at the next slide, we can examine what psychological safety really is. Psychological safety, coined by Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School when she was studying clinical teams. And Amy Edmondson was studying clinical teams back in 1999. She was looking at high-performing and low-performing clinical teams. And what she found was that the high-performing teams were making more mistakes than the low-performing teams. And that didn't make sense. Why would the high-performing teams be making more mistakes? So she sent some researchers in to the teams to find out what's going on, what's happening in these teams to make them make more mistakes. What she found was that the high-performing teams were admitting their mistakes, talking about them, surfacing them, and putting in procedures, practices, and protocols and checklists to stop them happening in the future or to mitigate the impact. The low-performing teams are hiding their mistakes, so they keep making the same mistake over and over again. They don't share the learning from mistakes, and the impact of mistakes is much greater because the mistake is hidden until it becomes so big that it can't be hidden at all. So through this dynamic, through this safety, this willingness to talk about mistakes, we can see that a high-performing team keeps improving. They keep getting better and better and better, and the impact of any mistakes they do make is smaller. So Amy Edmondson coined this term, this psychological safety, as a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated, speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, also known as a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So that's what psychological safety is, the ability to speak up in your team with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes that are different things, and we should remember those four things as being separate things. We should also examine what psychological safety isn't. There are a few myths, a few persistent beliefs about what psychological safety is not. So let's have a look at that on the next slide. What is psychological safety not? Well, it's not mindfulness and well-being. It does contribute to mindfulness and well-being, and that's really important, but it's not in the same bracket as mindfulness and well-being. It's not freedom from discomfort or conflict. In fact, in psychologically safe teams, we may see more discomfort, more conflict, but it's safe, productive conflict. It's positive, productive conflict that results in higher performance and better things happening than just interpersonal arguments. It's not freedom to say whatever you want either. It's not a laissez-faire attitude to being able to, the freedom to say whatever you want, regardless of the consequences for your teammates. In fact, it may be a responsibility to think more deeply about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. In that same respect, it's not about being nice, it's not about being overly nice, but it is about being kind. It is about being kind and giving appropriate feedback at the right time, delivered in kind and appropriate ways to help us all raise our standards, which comes to the next one. It's not about lowering standards either. It's about raising the standards of the team. And here is Google's Project Aristotle. This is some great evidence to show how psychological safety is foundational for high-performing teams. This is a really interesting study. This was done in 2013 with a team led by Julia Rozovsky of Google. And they were looking at high-performing teams. What makes a high-performing team? And they found these four factors: impact, meaning, structure, clarity, and dependability. These things matter. Team members need to know that their work makes a difference, has an impact, that actually matters and creates change. They need to care about their work. They need to have structure and clarity, so they need to be able to know what their priorities, responsibilities, goals, boundaries of decision-making are. But what was interesting was that teams that scored high on these 4 things still showed big differences in their performance. So people on the Project Aristotle team knew that something, at least one thing, was missing. And someone found Amy Edmonton's research, it's a clinical research from 1999, and measured psychological safety according to Amy's methodology, and found that all high-performing teams in Google possessed high degrees of psychological safety. Low-performing teams possessed very little at all. This is really great evidence to show that in teams, psychological safety is crucial, foundational for high performance. We cannot be high performing without psychological safety, no matter how good we are at the other aspects. But let's look at the next slide and see how this scales. So this is from the State of DevOps Reports 2019. And since 2019, the State of DevOps reports have shown that psychological safety is not only crucial for high-performing teams, it is crucial for high-performing teams, but it's also crucial for high-performing organizations. It's crucial to have psychological safety across the fabric of an organization. We can have high-performing teams, and that's great, and they'll perform highly within an organization. But for the organization to be successful, those teams must be able to work together in psychologically safe ways as well. So we need to create this fabric of psychological safety across the organization. Now, if we look at different domains, let's take ourselves out of technology and look at a different domain. Let's look at aviation on the next slide. This is really fascinating. Sidney Dekker has written a great book called The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error, which is a fantastic book and well worth a read if you're into human factors and human error and psychological safety. Now, what he showed was that airlines, global airlines that record most incidents, most near misses, incidents, mistakes, and problems on their books, actually have the lowest passenger mortality rating across all airlines in the real world. So that he showed that there's this inverse correlation between the willingness to talk about what might go wrong, what has gone wrong, and things actually going wrong in the real world. So we can see that this is just the scaling up of Amy Edmonton's clinical teams. At an organization level, the willingness to talk about what mistakes we've made and what has gone wrong results in higher performance in practice. We can also see an interesting dynamic here in the cockpit of a plane, and this is a pilot and co-pilot, and this has turned into a concept called CRM, cockpit resource management or crew resource management, depending on your perspective. And aviation, the industry of aviation has brought in this new paradigm of CRM in response to a number of air crashes and disasters that have been a result of this power dynamic between pilot and co-pilot, particularly with a few incidents, a few accidents, air accidents where the pilot has made a mistake. The pilot has, say, throttled down the wrong engine in response to an engine problem, and the co-pilot, because of the power dynamic, because the co-pilot was junior to the pilot and saw themselves as a lower figure in the power dynamic, didn't speak up, didn't raise concerns, didn't point out that they'd made a mistake, and that resulted in disaster. So this paradigm of CRM flips this on its head and shows us that actually the safest planes are those flown by junior pilots, with a senior co-pilot sitting next to them, coaching, mentoring, and supporting them. Not only is this the best way to learn, but it's actually the best way to the safest outcomes. And we can see this in software development as well, because when we're pair programming or mob programming, we can remember with ourselves that if we put the junior programmer hands on keyboard, writing code, with senior, more experienced programmers and developers sitting with them and supporting and coaching and helping them, not only is that the best way for them to learn to write better code, learn to create better systems, but it actually results in cleaner, more precise, more higher quality code as well. And of course, the senior developers, senior programmers get experience in coaching and mentoring and supporting as well. So let's look at another domain. Let's look at the case of manufacturing here. And this is a fantastic case. This is, in fact, my favorite example of psychological safety in practice, in the real world, psychological safety at work. This is a chap on the Toyota production line pulling the andon cord, that yellow cord you can see from the ceiling. And he's noticed some sort of defect, some sort of problem. Maybe it's a scratch on the side of the car, maybe the door's not going on right, or maybe it's as simple as he's realized his tools are far away over there, and if someone helps him move them nearer, he'll be more efficient in his work. He won't have to keep walking over there to get a different tool. So he's pulled the cord, He's pulled the cord, and that's stopped part of the production line. And the other people working on that part of the production line stop work because the production line has stopped. And they swarm over. They call it a swarm. And they swarm over. But the very first thing they do is they thank him for pulling the cord. They thank him for pulling the cord. And that is crucial because there is interpersonal risk in pulling the cord. It affects other people's work. It's interrupting their work. And you're asking for help. You're asking a question. You're relying on other people in the team. And so thanking for someone for pulling the cord is a core part of this process. It's part of the Jidoka process, part of Kaizen, and it addresses the psychology, not just the technical production line aspect, but the psychology of people at work. Just like Grace Hopper was saying, we must manage things and lead people. So pulling the cord in Toyota is seen as a duty, a gift to your colleagues, to the bosses of the organization, and the customers, because it results in higher quality, better cars, going through the production line faster, and a more joyful, more rewarding place of work. What's also interesting to note is that this cord, the Anton cord, is pulled around 2,000 times a month in the average Toyota plant. This is not a rare event. This is part of the fabric of daily work, pulling the cord. And you can implement the cord in your own workplaces. You don't actually have to have a physical yellow cord hanging from the ceiling, although you might choose to do that. But you could have a red button on a desk, or a Slack bot, a /andon that fires up a GIF and asks people to come and swarm over for help. Or you can just say, I'm pulling the cord. I need some help. I have a concern. I'd like to stop this project before it goes too far. Something else. Implement your own Anton cord in your own way, and you're practicing psychological safety at work. Now, if we look at the next slide, we can see another example from another different industry. This is from healthcare. In healthcare, when there's an accident, a slip, or a fall, or a patient incident, they implement this process called an after-action review. This is quite new in healthcare, and this addresses in a similar way to the Anton cord. This addresses the point that the best time to learn from something, the best time to learn from a mistake is now. The second best time is as soon as possible. The best time is now. And the after-action review, it occurs as soon as possible after you've made the patient safe or resolved the problem. And it asks these 4 questions. What was supposed to happen? What actually happened? Why was there a difference? Why was there a delta between those 2 things? And what can we learn from this? How can we make this better in the future? And this is another great thing that we can implement in technology and DevOps ourselves. When something goes wrong, immediately carry out an after-action review. What was supposed to happen? What actually happened? What's the difference between those 2 things? And how do we make that better in the future? Really great example from healthcare, really, really simple. So if we have a look at the next slide, this is just my example of 3 things that you can do, in addition to the things we've already looked at, the 3 things that you can do to foster greater psychological safety in your teams, in your workplace. First of all, make space to speak. We all ask questions at work. It's good to ask questions. Make sure that when we're asking questions, we're giving the space and silence, the space, the gap for people to answer questions in their own time, in their own way. So giving that space and time to answer those questions. And by asking questions, we're kind of asking people to speak up as well. We're not putting it on them to speak up without the question in the first place. Make everything an experiment. Frame work as a learning problem, not an execution problem. The outcome of work shouldn't always be the thing that we've delivered, the feature, the new system, the upgrade, but it's learning how to do it better next time. This is continuous improvement at work, and continuous improvement results not only in improvement of systems, but it results in greater psychological safety, knowing that by making everything an experiment, we're taking failure off the table. The only experiment that fails is the one we didn't learn from. So make everything an experiment. And finally, the most powerful thing you can do, particularly if you're in a role of leadership or privilege or tenure in your team, is admit your mistakes. Admit your own mistakes and acknowledge your own fallibility. By admitting our mistakes, we're modeling that it's safe for others on the team to do the same thing. And if we don't admit our mistakes, how can we expect other people on the team to admit theirs? So let's have a look at the next slide, and we see what it might look like when you have psychological safety, when you're on this journey and we're building psychological safety in our team. So when people have psychological safety, you might hear things like this. You might hear, I need some help. I have an idea. I think we have a problem. I disagree, or I made a mistake, or I made a really big mistake. and I need your help to fix it. What's interesting is that these are indicators of psychological safety in a team, but also saying these things, doing these things are great ways to foster psychological safety itself on your teams. Amy Edmondson says, one of the best ways to foster psychological safety is to pretend it already exists. So by doing these things, by modeling these behaviors, we're also increasing psychological safety and encouraging others to do the same. But yeah, I made a really big mistake is a really great way of building psychological safety. And this is particularly true for DevOps teams. If we have a look at the next slide, the best DevOps teams, the teams that make fewer mistakes, are those that talk about their mistakes. And we've all made big mistakes in our past. We've all made big errors and caused outages and production faults, particularly if we've got a bit of experience in technology. I've personally brought down email servers for 15,000 people for around a day by misconfiguring a DAG configuration in Exchange. And I've brought down production for a large e-commerce business for around 15 or 20 minutes by misconfiguring an auto-scaling group in AWS. Now, these things happen. But if we talk about them and admit them straight away, not only can we mitigate the impact of them and ask for help and do something about it, but we can put in processes and triggers and checklists and automated systems to stop us making those mistakes in the future. What we can also do as DevOps teams is come together and have mistake celebration, failure celebration parties where we talk about the big tire fires we created. Now, this does a few things. It normalizes talking about mistakes. It helps junior people on the team realize and learn that mistakes are a part of life. We shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes. They're a great way of learning. And on that, it's a fantastic way of helping other people learn from our own mistakes. If we hide our mistakes, it's only us learning from them. If we talk about and share our mistakes and share how we felt about our mistakes, we're helping other people learn. We're maximizing the learning potential of our mistakes, particularly the really, really big ones, the outages that are named after you. And they're the really great ones to talk about. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. If we have a look at the next slide, that's it. My name's Tom Geraghty. I'm from psychsafety.com. If you want to head over there, you can find newsletters, resources, join communities, join meetups, download toolkits, and everything else that you might want to dive into to help foster and build psychological safety on your teams. So thank you again. My name's Tom Geraghty, and enjoy the rest of Data Connect 2023.